There is a moment near the end of a dinner between two people who are dating, engaged, or married, somewhere across America, that lasts less than 10 seconds and somehow reveals more about the relationship than a year of anniversaries ever could. It is not the toast. It is not the hand on the table. It is the second the check lands between them, in dollars on a table in the United States, between a man and a woman who are supposed to be building a life together. Watch it happen enough times, and you start noticing something almost nobody says out loud in polite American company. The way a couple handles a bill is rarely about the bill. It is a live demonstration of who holds financial control in that relationship, and control, once it settles into a pattern, has a way of quietly writing the rest of the story, especially inside a country where credit scores, joint tax filings, and retirement accounts are the invisible scaffolding of almost every long-term relationship. Here is the belief most American women walk into relationships with. She assumes that how money gets handled early on, who pays, who plans, who tracks the spending, is just personality. Some people are generous, some are careful. That is just how people are. What she is not told is that these small habits are often the first draft of a much bigger financial arrangement, one that will eventually involve a shared lease, a joint checking account, maybe a mortgage with a 30-year term, maybe a 401k through an employer, and one person's name ends up on more of it than the others, almost by accident. Except in a country with this much financial paperwork, it was never really an accident. Let us talk about what actually happens financially inside relationships between a man and a woman in America, because the polite version of this conversation leaves out the part that matters most. Somewhere in the first year, most American couples make a decision they rarely discuss out loud, which is who becomes the architect of the household finances and who becomes a passenger in them. Sometimes it happens because one partner is naturally better with numbers. Sometimes it happens because one partner works longer hours and simply hands over the mental load of budgeting, bill pay, and credit card management because it feels easier in the moment. And sometimes, and this is the part nobody wants to name directly, it happens because one partner prefers it that way because a partner who does not track her own FICO score, does not know the interest rate on the mortgage, does not know what a Roth IRA even is or whether one exists in her name, is a partner who is significantly easier to keep in place. This is where the conversation has to get honest, because there is a real difference between a couple that divides labor and a couple where one partner is being financially isolated, and the line between them is thinner than most people think, especially in a country where a woman's entire financial identity can be reduced to a 3-digit credit score she may not even know how to check. Financial abuse rarely announces itself. It does not usually start with someone screaming about money. It starts small, and it starts reasonable sounding. One partner suggests combining accounts for simplicity, which sounds practical, except now every dollar she earns runs through an account someone else has full visibility and often full control over. One partner offers to handle the bills, so she does not have to worry about it, which sounds thoughtful, except somewhere along the way she stops knowing what the mortgage payment actually is, stops knowing the balance on the credit cards, stops knowing whether there is an emergency fund at all, and stops knowing what is even being reported to the IRS on their joint tax return every April. One partner discourages her from working or discourages her from taking the promotion, framing it as protecting the family, protecting her time, protecting the marriage, when what is actually being protected is the income gap between them, because an income gap is one of the most reliable predictors of who holds the power in a household, in America or anywhere else. Financial abuse also shows up as an allowance system dressed up as budgeting. A woman who has to ask for money for groceries, for gas, for her own haircut, in a household where her partner has unrestricted access to every account, is not experiencing financial teamwork. She is experiencing financial dependency by design. It shows up as coerced debt, where a partner opens a credit card in her name, or pressures her to co-sign a car loan, and her credit score quietly absorbs the damage of decisions she barely had a say in. It shows up as sabotage, where a partner intentionally causes her to be late to work or unreliable on a job, because a woman with an unstable income and a thin employment history is a woman with far fewer options if she ever needs to leave. None of this requires a man to be a villain twirling a mustache. Most of it is not even fully conscious. It happens gradually, through 1,000 small decisions that each seemed reasonable at the time, until one day an American woman looks up and realizes she does not have a single account in her own name, does not know her own credit utilization, has no retirement savings under her own social security number, and does not know what would happen to her financially if the relationship ended tomorrow. That is not an accident. That is an architecture, built one convenient shortcut at a time. If this kind of honest breakdown of how money quietly shapes relationships in America is something you want more of, subscribing keeps these conversations showing up in your feed instead of getting buried by everything else fighting for your attention. Now here is where the story usually surprises people because the instinct is to assume the fix is simple: just keep separate accounts, just stay financially independent, problem solved. It is not that simple, and pretending it is ignores something real about how American partnerships are supposed to work. A relationship where two people never merge a single dollar, never build shared financial goals, never move towards something like a joint retirement plan or a shared brokerage account is not automatically healthier. Sometimes total financial separation is itself a symptom, a sign that trust was never fully built, or that one partner is quietly keeping an exit ready at all times because some part of them never fully believed the relationship was safe to be financially entangled in. The goal is never total merging or total separation. The goal is financial visibility, which is a very different thing. A woman in a healthy financial partnership knows the numbers. She knows what is in the savings account, what the household debt-to-income ratio looks like, whether there is term life insurance, whether there is a will or a living trust, whether her name is actually on the deed or just assumed to be. She has access, not just involvement. Access is the difference between being asked how she feels about the budget and actually being able to log into the account and see it herself any day without asking permission first. Here is the twist most people do not expect, and it changes how this entire conversation should be understood. The American women most at risk of financial entrapment in a relationship are not always the ones with the least money. Plenty of women who earn strong six-figure salaries, who have advanced degrees, who look financially secure from the outside, are quietly locked out of real financial power inside their own marriages because income and authority over that income are not the same thing. A woman can bring home more than her partner and still not know the balance of the joint account, still be told what she can and cannot spend on herself, still feel a flicker of guilt reaching for her own card at a restaurant because somewhere along the way, spending on herself started to feel like something she needed to justify. This is where the stakes climb, because financial control inside a relationship rarely stays contained to money. It becomes identity. A woman who does not control her own finances slowly stops trusting her own judgment in other areas too, because when someone else manages your money long enough, you start to internalize the idea that you are never quite capable of managing it yourself. That belief does not stay in the budget. It follows her into decisions about her career, her friendships, her sense of whether her opinions are worth defending out loud at the dinner table. There is a specific term worth understanding here, one that shows up more and more in American research on domestic abuse, because it explains so much of what happens during and after these relationships end. It is called economic abuse, and researchers who study domestic violence across the United States increasingly recognize it as one of the most powerful reasons women stay in relationships they know are unhealthy. It is not always about love, and it is not always about fear of being alone. It is often the simple, brutal math of not having enough independent income, savings, or credit history to survive on her own in America, especially once children are involved and childcare costs enter the equation. A woman can be fully aware her marriage is harming her and still calculate correctly that leaving means starting from zero with no retirement account in her own name, no established credit history, and no financial runway to get through even a single month alone. That is not weakness. That is an accurate risk assessment made by someone who is systematically kept from building the resources that would have made leaving survivable. This is exactly why financial literacy inside relationships is not a nice extra for American women. It is protection. Every woman, regardless of how secure her relationship feels right now, benefits from understanding her own numbers, knowing her credit score, and what is actually on her credit report from all three major bureaus. Having at least one account, whether it is a savings account or a retirement account like a Roth IRA or a traditional 401k that exists entirely in her name, untouched by anyone else's access or approval. Understanding what a prenuptial agreement actually does, which is not romantic pessimism, it is financial clarity, spelling out in advance what happens to assets, debts, and property if the relationship ends, so that nobody is renegotiating their entire financial future during the worst emotional moment of their life. Knowing what community property or equitable distribution looks like in her specific state, because these rules vary significantly from state to state across America, and most women only learn the difference during a divorce, which is the single worst time to be learning anything about the law. There is also the matter of what happens on paper, quietly, every single year. Filing jointly on a federal tax return can offer real advantages, but it also means both partners are legally responsible for what is reported to the IRS, which means a woman who signs a joint return without reviewing it is putting her name on numbers she may have never actually seen. There is a legal protection for this exact situation, something the IRS refers to as innocent spouse relief, and the fact that so few American women have ever heard of it says everything about how quietly this entire system operates in the background of a marriage. None of this is about planning for a relationship to fail. It is about refusing to be financially illiterate inside a partnership that is supposed to be built on trust, because trust and transparency are not the same as dependency. A relationship can be deeply loving and still involve two informed adults who each know exactly where they stand financially, together and individually, inside a system as complicated as the American one. There is another quiet detail almost nobody in America checks until it is far too late, and that is the beneficiary designation sitting inside every 401k, every Roth IRA, every life insurance policy. Most people assume a will controls where their money goes when they die. It does not for these accounts. A beneficiary designation overrides a will completely, which means an American woman could update her will after a divorce, feel legally protected, and still have her retirement account quietly pay out to an ex-husband because nobody ever went back and changed that one form. This is not a minor technicality. It is one of the most common and most devastating financial oversights in the country, and it disproportionately affects women who assumed paperwork filed years ago in a moment of love would simply take care of itself. Then there is the matter of what happens if a relationship becomes financially dangerous and a woman actually decides to leave. This is where American financial systems get complicated in ways nobody explains ahead of time. A joint account can be frozen or drained by either party without the other's permission, which is why financial counselors who work with domestic violence survivors across the United States often recommend quietly opening an individual account and rebuilding independent credit history well before any conversation about leaving actually happens, not as an act of betrayal, but as a basic safety net. There is also spousal support, sometimes called alimony depending on the state, which exists precisely because family courts recognize that one partner may have sacrificed years of earning potential, retirement contributions, and career growth to support the household, and the law tries, imperfectly, to account for that sacrifice on the way out. Very few women understand how alimony is calculated, how long it typically lasts, or how dramatically it varies by state, until they are sitting across from a lawyer asking questions they should have been asking years earlier. None of this is meant to frighten anyone out of loving someone or out of building a life with a partner. It is meant to point at something American culture rarely says directly, which is that romance and financial literacy are not opposites. A woman can be completely in love and still keep her own credit file active. She can trust her husband completely and still know the exact balance of every account with her name on it. She can build a beautiful, generous, deeply connected marriage and still insist on reviewing the joint tax return line by line before she signs it, not because she expects betrayal, but because financial fluency is simply what an equal partnership looks like on paper, not just in feeling. Let us bring this back to where we started, that small, almost invisible moment when the bill lands on the table. It was never really about who pays for dinner. It is a compressed, 10-second preview of a much larger pattern, the pattern of who gets to decide, who gets informed, who gets asked, and who simply gets told. A woman who has never been allowed to reach for the bill without hesitation may be the same woman who has never been allowed to reach for a financial decision in her own marriage without checking first whether it will be permitted. The healthiest version of partnership was never about splitting every check exactly down the middle. It was never about refusing every gesture of generosity out of fear of what it might cost later. It is about a woman knowing, clearly, and without needing anyone's permission to know it, exactly where she stands financially, in the relationship and outside of it, in a country where that knowledge is often the only thing standing between her and starting over with nothing, so that every act of generosity she gives or receives is a choice, not a quiet trade she did not fully understand she was making. Because in the end, financial control inside a relationship rarely looks like a villain. It looks like convenience, like love, like someone offering to take care of the details so she does not have to worry. The question worth asking is not whether her partner offers to handle the money. The question is whether she still could, at any moment, without asking, without apologizing, and without starting from zero. That is not a romantic question. Across America, it is the only one that actually protects her. And maybe that is the real ending here, the one that has nothing to do with credit scores or retirement accounts at all. Every American woman deserves a relationship where love and financial safety are not competing priorities, where being cared for never quietly turns into being controlled, and where the word partnership actually means two equal names on the paperwork, not just two names on the lease. The bill at dinner will keep landing on tables across this country every single night, in small towns and big cities, in first dates and 30-year marriages, and it will keep asking its quiet, 10-second question. The only thing that changes is whether a woman already knows the answer before the folder even hits the table.